After months of grueling house hunting, Reagan Bartlow and her husband found their dream home.
You could see the finish line. All we had to do was wire the money and then go sign the papers. And then in a matter of minutes, it all came crashing down.
Wednesday was supposed to be the best day of Reagan Bartlow's life. The papers were ready. The keys were waiting. After months of searching, she and her husband had found their home, and all that was left was showing up and signing. But Reagan never made it to that closing table, because days before Wednesday arrived, she got an email. It looked routine. It felt routine. It was formatted exactly like every other message she'd received from her title company for weeks. It had a closing date. It had congratulations. It had wiring instructions. And Reagan did what any prepared, responsible buyer would do. She followed them. She wired $255,000. Her down payment, her savings, everything. And the moment that wire cleared, the people on the other end of that email disappeared, because they were never her title company. They never had been. We're going to walk through exactly how it happened, beat by beat, how criminals who had been watching Reagan's email chain for weeks turned her closing day into a $255,000 trap, what the system did about it, and whether she ever got any of that money back. Reagan and her husband had spent months grinding through one of the most exhausting processes ordinary people face. House hunting isn't just stressful, it's emotionally consuming. Every showing, every offer, every negotiation chips away at you. So when they finally found the right house and got to the finish line, the relief was enormous.
You could see the finish line. All we had to do was wire the money and then go sign the papers. And then in a matter of minutes, it all came crashing down.
That feeling, that exhale, that drop in your guard is exactly what the scammers were counting on. They don't strike when you're anxious and hypervigilant. They strike when you finally let yourself believe it's going to be okay. And Reagan had every reason to believe it was going to be okay. But the email that arrived days before closing wasn't from who she thought. Days before the scheduled closing, an email arrived. It referenced the closing date. It had wiring instructions. It was formatted exactly the way every other communication from her title company had been formatted.
Congratulations, we'll be ready to close on Wednesday, and all you have to do is go ahead and wire your funds. And that way all you have to do is come in and sign.
It made perfect sense.
She described it as making perfect sense. And it did make perfect sense, because nothing about it was designed to seem wrong. The scammers hadn't sent a cold message out of nowhere. They hadn't guessed her title company's name or the closing date. They already knew all of it. They'd been watching the entire conversation. Here's how. Tom Cronite is the founder of a technology company called Certified, which works with banks, title companies, and federal law enforcement to fight exactly this kind of fraud. He knows the mechanics intimately, because in 2015, before he built his company, he was a victim himself, losing $180,000 the same way.
The email that includes the payment request with wiring instructions isn't coming out of the blue. It's tacked on to a thread of emails that they've been having for 2, 3, 4 weeks.
Criminal organizations hack into those email chains, targeting financial institutions, real estate companies, and law firms, and collect everything they need to impersonate a trusted advisor. Then they wait. They wait for the exact moment when a wire request would feel completely routine, and then they slide their instructions in. By the time Reagan received that email, the people behind it already knew her closing date, her title company's name, and exactly how much money she was about to send. Reagan had no reason to doubt it, and she did exactly what the email told her to do. Reagan wired $255,000, her entire down payment, everything.
And so our nest egg, our savings, everything at that moment was gone.
But she didn't know that yet. The closing was still on the calendar. The house was still waiting. Life felt completely normal. She had followed the instructions, the confirmation had gone through, and Wednesday was coming. For a few more days, everything still felt like it was on track. And then her phone rang on closing day. The call came from her realtor, and the words that came through the phone collapsed everything in an instant.
You haven't been talking to the title lawyer. And at that point, my whole world fell apart because I had already wired all of the down payment money for our house, and it was about $255,000.
The money was already gone. Wire transfers, once processed, are nearly impossible to reverse, especially when the funds have already moved through correspondent institutions, potentially overseas. The house wasn't theirs. The savings weren't there. Months of work, months of hope, erased in the time it took to make a phone call. There was no mistake Reagan made that you wouldn't have made too. That's the whole point. And Reagan's case is not the exception. It's not even close.
Your best case scenario is a consumer losing their down payment. Your worst case scenario is your cash buyer and their entire life savings is gone in a single wire transfer.
Have you seen that happen?
I see it happen almost daily, if not multiple times a day.
Known losses from this type of fraud are estimated at around $500 million per year. But Cronite says that number may only represent about 10% of actual losses, placing the real figure closer to $5 billion annually. $5 billion every year. And most of those people never recover a cent. And the people behind it aren't lone hackers. They're running operations that rival Fortune 500 companies in investment and coordination.
Global organized crime syndicates and cartels are often behind these billion-dollar operations, skillfully hacking into financial institutions, real estate companies, and law firms to get everything they need to impersonate a trusted advisor. So when somebody like Reagan gets an email to wire her down payment for closing, there's nothing suspicious about it.
They are not opportunists. They are professionals. They gather every piece of information they need to become, in the victim's eyes, a completely trusted and familiar voice, and then they deploy it at the exact right moment. The sophistication of the operation is why ordinary people keep falling for it. It's not naivety. It's an asymmetry of resources that almost no individual buyer can overcome on their own. Which means, by the time Reagan got that email, the scammers already knew everything, and she never stood a chance. Public reporting provides very little on what law enforcement or Reagan's bank did specifically in her case. Records don't confirm whether any funds were traced, frozen, or partially recovered. What we do know is what Reagan herself said publicly. Wire fraud recovery is brutal. Banks are often within their legal rights to deny recovery once a transfer has been sent. The consumer authorized the wire, even if they were deceived into doing so. Federal investigations can take years and frequently don't result in recovered funds, even when perpetrators are eventually identified. Scammer identity and charges in Reagan's case are not confirmed in available reporting. The bank didn't steal from Reagan, but the bank also didn't stop the wire. And in this industry, those two facts can somehow coexist. But Reagan decided to do something with what happened to her. Reagan chose to go public.
I would love to be able to be made whole in this situation. I don't know that that's going to happen, but I do know that if I tell the story, maybe I can help somebody else, because I wouldn't wish this on anyone.
Not because it made her whole, not because there was a satisfying resolution waiting at the end of her story, but because staying silent guaranteed the next person wouldn't see it coming either. $255,000 gone. The house gone. The closing that was supposed to be the end of a long, hard search turned into the beginning of a different kind of nightmare. But Reagan is still standing, still talking, still trying to make something useful out of the worst day of her life. That counts for something. It has to. Before you wire a single dollar for any closing, call your title company directly using a phone number you looked up yourself, not a number from any email. Confirm the wiring instructions out loud, by voice, before you send a single cent. Do it every time. No exceptions, regardless of how routine it feels. Reagan couldn't get her money back, but you might be able to keep yours.